Well, we'll get in. All right, Jenny, thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
We're pumped to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Do you know what our secret nickname is for you?
No.
The Witch Doctor.
Amazing.
It was born
in the household. That's my nickname.
That with me, Kate, and Taylor, because the Braziers have the knee problems, and Taylor came in one time, or I don't know if you remember, one or two times. Time.
Yeah.
No knee pain.
That's amazing.
It's been 2 years and 0 knee pain now. So for anybody listening, if you have knee pain, go see Jenny.
Go see Jenny. Witch doctor, the magic healer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, according to some people, my name in their phones.
So for everyone listening, people hear Pilates and I think they just think yoga.
Yeah.
Give us your definite. What is Pilates from your perspective? Explain it to everyone.
Okay, so I think that Pilates can be a lot of different things, and there are different modalities, and people can use it for fitness or people can use it for biomechanics. But one of the things, at least for me with Pilates, is it's not really about yoga, which is more about lengthening or stretching or static stretching. But Pilates for me has been a path for me to help people heal using, biomechanics. My background's in physiology and anatomy, so I used that from my university and then kind of added Pilates to it. And there's so much to it, right? We can use equipment. We really utilize a lot of spring tension, the pre-tension and recoil, and the way that the joints kind of absorb those forces is really different than using tubing or bands or weights, dumbbells. So we can really utilize the spring tension to really work the muscles as far as they can lengthen and shorten. So with what I do, adding a lot of length under load with the spring tension really helps people get into some good ranges of motion, but under load. So it's not just so static. And so Pilates for me has been something that we've been able to use at my studio to really help people heal, do a lot of post-operative, rehab and sports performance. And it's definitely not stretching, and it's a lot of strengthening, both eccentric and concentrically. And then, there's a lot of fascial stuff that we integrate into that as well. So it's very complex and it could be a fitness class if somebody reads, and it could be more fitness driven, which is great. But for me, what I use it for is Pilates is definitely, to stay healthy, to stay better at your sport or better, even if your sport is hiking or biking or skiing or whatever it is, we really utilize that so people can be better at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And healing. It seems like there's a portion of PT in it almost.
Mm-hmm. Without question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you do is so much more than just Pilates. Obviously, we could spend 3 hours with you explaining what Pilates is, right?
Yeah.
You probably get the question, isn't yoga just Pilates?
Right.
All the time. That's probably a common question that comes across. But you do so much more than Pilates with the athletes and the people that you work with, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But let's, for at least a portion of this, focus just on Pilates. Then we want to get into your journey of all the healing and everything else that goes along with Pilates. So I did a little research about the history of Pilates because I've trained with you. But for the listeners, can you where did Pilates come from? Where was it born from? I know there's several different types of Pilates, some that you possibly don't agree with, right? Yeah. And the one you specifically do. Can you take us through that journey of the history of Pilates?
Yeah. So Joseph Pilates obviously was the founder of Pilates, and he really utilized his skills or came up with this methodology.
This is in the 1800s? 1890?
No, 1900s.
It wasn't,
20s, 30s, yeah.
Okay.
And he was
fairly recent.
And he was helping war veterans, so they would, be out fighting, get a leg blown off, or I know that sounds violent, but they'd be in bed basically, and then in the infantry he would go in and he figured out that these people needed to move, but they couldn't move, so he would use spring tension from the beds that they were in.
And I didn't read that.
Really? So that's where the springs come from on Reformers.
Yeah. And he'd move the springs around from the bed, like the box spring, and then they'd just lay on the mattress, and he'd have them use the springs to
really
strengthen muscles in their arms and their legs. And what he found in doing that is that they were getting stronger and they were healing and they were getting better, because to just lay there and do nothing, even if you're severely injured is really just a lot of atrophy. The muscles go away, the blood's not pumping as well, the nervous system isn't, able to work as well. So he just started using the actual beds in the infantry to create basically like a piece of equipment that people could use for strengthening without getting out of bed. So
I didn't know the history.
That's crazy.
yeah.
I had heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, mat Pilates, which has no apparatus, right? It's just done on the floor.
Yeah.
Was kind of born while he was in prison. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And it was a prison workout, basically.
Well,
like that's kind
and
of.
I'm not as familiar with that, but he did end up doing a lot of the mat work because he did move to New York in the U.S. And then him and another lady, they started working with a lot of dancers. And
Okay.
that's why you see so many dancers incorporating Pilates into their programming. And, I work with so many dance
From that
departments.
era.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then Romana actually, even Moira Merrithew, who, I do Merrithew and Stop Pilates, but, she trained in New York, and there was Pilates there, and then she branched off, but that was like the traditional, original Pilates method, and they started working with ballet dancers, basically to keep them healthy. So, and then that's why you see so many dancers and dance programs integrating Pilates. Like a lot of the dancers that I work with that have been to universities, they'll always have reformers and, do some type of Pilates for their dancers and staying healthy.
So if you take a muscle, just let's say an average athlete, let's take a 17-year-old high school football player who lifts weights, works out, maybe his fitness is fairly good. Explain what Pilates and what you do specifically with Stop Pilates, what's it going to do to that muscle? How would Pilates impact in a positive way that 17-year-old?
Okay. Well, this would
And
probably
I know that's a broad question
Yeah.
because you're very specific. But when we talk about lengthening the muscles, doing it under load, I think some of these terms are probably foreign to someone who's never
for sure.
had a Pilates course, never done any instruction, and never, more importantly, been on an apparatus,
Yeah.
right? Which is a whole nother journey in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, I would say if I had to pick one thing to really focus on, what I do with all of my athletes across the board is, with the exception of dancers, because you have to train them just a little different because they work in those end ranges of motion. But the thing with Pilates that is so important and really benefits these athletes so much is they really work their body in a really compressed position a lot. They're lifting heavy weight. They're training for explosion, wattage, power. So they train in the weight room. There's a lot of rigidity in it, which is much needed in any sport, right? Because we want them to have power and explosive movement. But what that does a lot of times is it shortens the tendons. And so then they can go stretch, but static stretching in the research has shown that you lose force production. So if they're statically stretching, but then they're lifting heavy in the weight room, it's very counterproductive.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So if you stretch, do static stretching before, say, a game, you potentially can lose up to 40%, 30% force production in your explosive movement.
Wow.
So, and most injuries, really a high percentage, happen on the eccentric phase of movement, which means when the muscle's lengthening. So you can think of a basketball player, you see a lot of Achilles and a lot of
Like Aaron Rodgers,
hamstrings.
you saw him
Yeah.
when he planted off his foot.
And it starts to lengthen.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't trained their body to lengthen their muscles under load. So the minute they add speed and force, these guys are strong, and these athletes are strong, and the Achilles, use the Achilles for an example, starts to lengthen. Well, they've only trained it in this small range of motion, so as they push off and they have speed and force, they'll snap it. But if I can get them on a reformer and I have, I can use light spring tension and I have the pre-tension and recoil, it doesn't matter how far out there they go. They can't lose control because the springs would just float, they bounce back in or they lose control out. And their bodies, sensory-wise, are not usually going to let them do that. So, when I get somebody in to the studio and they haven't trained on a reformer, or these guys, that I work with that haven't trained a lot of length in their muscles, they'll start pushing the carriage are pushing against the spring tension, and their range of motion, maybe they can push out 4 to 5 inches.
Yeah.
So one of my first goals with them is to get them to get all the way out, get their tendons and muscles to get a lot of length under a lot of spring tension. And I don't mean just sometimes the lighter spring tension can create more load for the muscle. so that when they get out onto the field, they've also, or the court, they've trained fluid movement, right? Because the spring tension, if, as you guys know, because you've been on a reformer, if you lose control, you come back in and it bangs into the stopping point, you know? So you have to have good joint control. So when they push out, and let's say their hamstrings, they're going into, I'll say, a simple lunge, right? And we do it on a reformer where they go out and their hip flexors, hamstrings are in a really lengthened position. Well, then from that eccentric place, they have to be able to contract the muscle to bring the carriage back
Under
in.
control.
Under control. Because if they don't, then they get out there in their sport and they start, like, they're going to lengthen their muscles, right? They're running, they're opening up their hips, they're doing a lot of lateral movement, but they've been training in the weight room. A lot of rigidity, you know, explosive movement, heavy weight, which is great. Like, we want them to
need
do
it all, but
both. But then they are asked to go out, you know, they'll lift heavy, let's say one day, and then the next day they need to go out and go to practice, right? Where they're running, they're doing gassers, or they're doing, you know, like a lot of jumping. If you play like something like volleyball, they've not trained their tendons to do that, so they just give way. So you see a lot of times, like in spring training or fall, you know, where they've lifted heavy and they have to go out and practice. That's where you see a lot of the injuries happen.
Yeah.
So I just train their, like in Pilates, for me, if I had to like narrow it down, it would be really to get them a lot of strength with their muscles lengthened. Because sometimes you guys have done it, so you'll push the carriage out and the muscles are lengthened. It's like you can't get it back in because they can't contract their muscles with them in a lengthened position.
Because everything has been explosive, and it's tightened things down to where they don't have longevity. The muscles, hardness, not supple.
Right.
And they can't handle it.
It's rigid.
Under a light load. Like I've experienced this.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
I've stood and I've done many workouts with you, and the best way I can describe it is like a baby deer.
Baby giraffe legs.
Right.
It's like Bambi trying to walk. It's exactly what it looks like.
It is, yeah.
It's actually, if you go in with any ego to do your first workout with a proper Pilates instructor, with Jenny, the ego gets stripped back pretty quick.
Well, you go in, you think you're fairly strong or whatever sport you're in, and then if you're in a group class, you look to your right and there's a 65-year-old woman just kicking your ass. I'm dripping sweat off my nose.
Right.
And you're just like, what is going on here? It's so different
wild.
than what everyone's used to.
Right, for sure. And what we've been taught and conditioned that fitness is, or being in shape. I mean, you know, you guys know I get these pro athletes in and they're strong and they are fit and they've made it to the professional level. And they haven't done it not being strong or strategic about how they've gotten there. But I always say to them, because, you know, it's humbling and you come in and it can be a little overwhelming, like, what the heck? But I always say, like, you come here with it, like an injury usually is how I get them. But either way, like, you've had amazing strategies to get to where you are. There's nothing like broken or not strong about you, but now you are moving up to higher levels and a higher skill set. So you want to be better, faster, stronger. We need more strategies. So when they come to Pilates, I just kind of explain it's just another strategy to get them to be able to move better and more in a fluid way, because usually they're not taught that.
Yeah.
I think it is, first of all, you have to commit